They say everyone in a small town knows everyone else. But what they don't tell you is that everyone is also keeping the same secret. Behind the white picket fences and the friendly smiles of rural America, there's a darkness that never sees the light of day. Tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on the things they don't want the outsiders to see. From towns that don't appear on any map, to neighbors who haven't aged in 40 years, and the horrifying reason why some basements remain permanently bolted shut. You're listening to Midnight Outcry. Lock your doors, turn down the lights, and let's dive into 10 of the most disturbing small-town secrets ever shared on the internet. Whatever you do, don't let them know you're watching. Has your town ever had a secret that no one dared to speak about? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Story 1. The clicking of the plastic casing against the mahogany desk sounded like a gunshot in the dead silence of the Blackwood Memorial Library. I'm Marcus Reed, a 28-year-old freelance data analyst currently living in a cramped, drafty apartment in the north side of Chicago. My life is usually measured in spreadsheets, SQL queries, and the steady hum of a cooling fan, but 3 days ago, everything changed. I was at the library, one of those old, Gothic-style buildings that smells like dust and forgotten history, looking for some peace and quiet to finish a project. I found a copy of a rare, out-of-print text on urban planning tucked away in the basement archives. When I pulled the book from the shelf, a heavy, metallic USB drive fell out of a hollowed-out section in the back cover. It was a rugged, industrial-looking thing, scratched and weathered, with no markings other than a series of hand-etched numbers on the side, N922. Naturally, I should have turned it into the front desk. I should have walked away. But curiosity is a persistent itch, and as a data guy, I'm hardwired to look for answers. I tucked it into my pocket, the cold weight of the metal pressing against my thigh the whole walk home. When I finally sat down at my desk that night, the rain was lashing against my window, blurring the city lights into smears of neon. I didn't use my main rig. I'm not an idiot. I pulled out an old air-gapped laptop I use for testing, something that's never touched my home Wi-Fi. I plugged the drive in. The computer groaned, the ancient hard drive spinning up with a mechanical whine that sounded like a warning. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was simply titled, The Harvest. Inside were hundreds of subfolders, each labeled with a name and a date. I scrolled through them, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. These weren't just documents, they were life stories. I clicked on one at random, Miller, Sarah, Doro 3, 1219. The folder contained dozens of high-resolution photos. Sarah at the grocery store, Sarah walking her dog, Sarah sleeping in her bedroom, taken from an angle that could only mean the photographer was standing right over her bed. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. This wasn't just some creepy stalker stash. It was organized, clinical, and terrifyingly thorough. There were spreadsheets detailing her daily routine, what time she left for work, which subway car she usually took, her allergies, her deepest fears listed in a column titled Vulnerabilities. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I wanted to unplug the drive right then, to throw it into the Chicago River and forget I ever saw it. But then I saw a folder at the very bottom of the list. It wasn't alphabetical. It was highlighted in red, Read, Marcus 11-14-23. My breath hitched. That's today's date. I clicked it. The first thing that popped up was a photo of me, taken less than an hour ago, walking into my apartment building. I was wearing my blue parka, my head down against the wind. I looked tired. I looked vulnerable. I scrolled down. There were photos of me inside my apartment taken through the window, sure, but then I saw a file labeled Internal Feed. MP4. I clicked it. The video window opened and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a live feed. It was a wide-angle shot of my living room. I could see the back of my own head hunched over the laptop, the blue light of the screen reflecting off the wall in front of me. I froze. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't even breathe. I was watching myself on a delay of maybe 2 seconds. In the video, I saw myself slowly turn my head to the left, looking toward the hallway that leads to my kitchen. In the video, just behind the shadow of my refrigerator, a door that should have been closed was standing slightly ajar. A pale, thin hand was gripping the edge of the wood. I didn't look at the hallway in real life. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to that small, graining video window. I watched as a figure began to peel itself out from behind the door. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a heavy, dark coat that looked like it was made of wet leather. Its face was obscured by a mask that looked like it had been stitched together from pieces of old yellowed parchment. The figure in the video stopped. It looked directly at the camera I couldn't even see in my own home. It raised a finger to its lips in a shushing motion. I felt a wave of pure primal terror wash over me. My laptop's speakers crackled, and a voice distorted low and sounding like sandpaper on stone whispered through the small tinny speakers. "Do you like what you found, Marcus?" I slammed the laptop shut. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the rain against the glass and the frantic, ragged thumping of my heart. I sat there in the dark, the metallic used drive still plugged into the side of the machine, feeling like a beacon in the night. I knew I had to get out. I grabbed my phone and my keys, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped them. I didn't look at the kitchen. I didn't look at the hallway. I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I burst out into the hallway of my apartment building and ran for the stairs, ignoring the elevator. I didn't stop until I was out on the street, the cold rain soaking through my shirt. I ran 3 blocks before I stopped under a street lamp, doubled over and gasping for air. I pulled my phone out to call 911, but as I went to unlock it, a notification popped up on the screen. It was an airdrop request from an unknown sender. The file name was Run Faster, JP. I looked around the empty street. The parked cars looked like hunched beasts in the shadows. The alleyways felt like open mouths waiting to swallow me whole. I felt a vibration in my hand. Another airdrop. He is right behind you. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I sprinted toward the nearest police station, my lungs burning, my feet pounding against the wet pavement. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every rustle of a wind-blown trash bag sounded like the heavy coat of that thing from the video. When I finally reached the precinct, I practically threw myself through the doors. The desk sergeant looked up, startled, as I collapsed onto the linoleum floor, babbling about the drive and the video and the man in my kitchen. They sent a car to my apartment. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, wrapped in a thin, scratchy wool blanket, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee that I couldn't drink. When the officers came back, their faces were grim. "Mr. Reed," the lead officer said, kneeling down in front of me, "we searched your apartment, top to bottom, and," I asked, my voice cracking, "did you find him? Did you find the camera?" The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "There was no one there, Marcus, and we didn't find any cameras. But," he hesitated, reaching into a plastic evidence bag, "we found your laptop. It was open on your desk. The drive," I said. "Did you see the files?" "The USB port was empty," he said quietly, "but there was a note taped to the screen." He held up the evidence bag. Inside was a small square of yellowed parchment, the same material as the mask I'd seen in the video. On it, written in thick, black ink that looked like it was still wet, were 4 words, "Thanks for the update." I haven't gone back to my apartment. I'm staying in a motel on the outskirts of the city, paying in cash. My phone turned off and the battery pulled out. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that pale hand on the edge of the door. Every time I hear a floorboard creak, I wonder if I'm being watched. Because here's the thing that's keeping me awake, the thought that's rotting my brain from the inside out. I'm a data analyst. I know how file structures work. I know how timestamps are generated. When I was in that police station, I remembered something I saw on the drive before I slammed the laptop shut. In the folder labeled with my name, there was a subfolder titled Final Disposition. The date on that folder wasn't today. It was tomorrow. I'm sitting here in this motel room, staring at the door, watching the digital clock on the bedside table. It's 11:58 p.m. In 2 minutes, it will be tomorrow. And I just realized something that makes my skin crawl. This motel room has a small decorative mirror hanging right across from the bed. A mirror I didn't notice when I checked in. A mirror that's angled perfectly to see the back of my head as I sit here, typing this out on a burner phone. I can hear something moving in the crawl space above the ceiling. A slow, rhythmic dragging sound, like wet leather being pulled across wood. I don't think I'm gonna make it to sunrise. If you find this, if you ever find a metallic USB drive in an old library, don't be curious. Some data isn't meant to be analyzed. Some files are just waiting for you to open the door. The clock just flipped. It's 12,000 AM. The dragging sound has stopped right above my head. And the mirror. I can see a pale hand reaching down from the vent. Story 2. I thought the silence of the Alaskan wilderness would be my sanctuary, but I didn't realize that in Kalskag Point, the silence is actually a scream held behind teeth. I'm Miller Hayes, a 37-year-old former civil surveyor from Chicago, currently hunkered down in a cabin 300 miles north of Anchorage. I'm a man who spent his life measuring land, quantifying the world in degrees and decimals, believing that if you could map a place, you could own it. I was wrong. I came up here 6 months ago, chasing a pioneer's grant, basically the state paying you to occupy land that nobody else wants. I thought I was getting the deal of a lifetime. A 4-bedroom house, 20 acres of timber, and a view of the aurora that would make a grown man weep, all for the price of maintaining the property. It's a relic of the gold rush that somehow survived into the 21st century, or at least it's supposed to be. When I rolled my beat-up Ford F-5050 into the town square last October, the first thing I noticed wasn't the cold. It was the lack of movement, no dogs barking, no smoke from the chimneys. Just row after row of perfectly preserved Victorian-style houses, their windows staring back at me like dead eyes. The man who gave me the keys was named Elias. He met me at a gas station 2 towns over, handed me a heavy brass ring, and told me, "Don't leave the lights on after midnight, and if you hear someone knocking at the cellar door, don't answer. It's just the permafrost shifting." He laughed when he said it, but his eyes stayed flat like 2 gray stones. I laughed too. I was a city boy. I thought he was just trying to spook the lower 48 tourist. I wish I had listened. My first week was peaceful, if you can call it that. The house was beautiful, filled with heavy oak furniture and thick wool rugs, but the stillness was heavy. It felt like the air was made of lead. I spent my days clearing brush and trying to figure out where everyone had gone. The town was supposed to have a population of 42. I hadn't seen a single soul, not even a crow. It was on the 10th day that the logic of my surveyor's brain started to fracture. I was walking down Main Street, looking for the post office, when I noticed something through the window of the local diner. The tables were set. There were plates of food, half-eaten burgers, cold coffee, a slice of cherry pie with a fork resting on the rim. But the food wasn't rotten. It wasn't even moldy. It looked like it had been served 5 minutes ago, yet the dust on the floor was 3 inches thick. I pushed the door open. The bell jingled, a sound so loud in the vacuum of that town that I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Hello," I called out. My voice didn't echo, it just dropped, like the room was swallowing the sound. I walked to the counter and touched the burger. It was ice cold, but the bread was soft. I looked at the calendar on the wall. October 12th, 1994. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thump-thump coming from the kitchen. I should have run. Every instinct I had, every evolutionary trigger honed over millions of years told me to get back to my truck and never look back. But I'm a surveyor. I need to know the layout. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The stove was on. A pot of water was boiling, the steam rising in thick white plumes. But there was no one there. The thump-thump was coming from a meat cleaver, suspended in midair, rhythmically hitting a wooden cutting board. It was moving with the precision of a clock, chopping nothing but shadows. I backed out of that diner so fast I tripped over a curve and sliced my hand open on the frozen gravel. I scrambled into my truck, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told myself it was a hallucination. High altitude, isolation, the cabin fever people talk about. I drove back to my house, locked every door, and sat in the dark with a shotgun across my lap. That night, the sun went down at 3:30 p.m. By 5:30 p.m., the emptiness started to make sense. I was sitting in my living room when I noticed the shadows. Usually, a shadow needs a source, right? A chair, a lamp, a person. But these shadows were independent. They were crawling across the walls like spilled ink, darker than the night outside. They didn't have shapes, not human ones anyway. They were jagged, shifting masses that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. Then came the knocking, not at the front door, not at the windows. It was coming from beneath me. Thud, thud, thud. "It's just the permafrost," I whispered to myself, clutching the shotgun until my knuckles turned white. Elias said it's just the permafrost. But the permafrost doesn't whisper your name. "Miller." The voice was thin, like the sound of wind whistling through a cracked rib. It wasn't coming from the cellar. It was coming from the floorboards directly under my feet. I jumped onto the sofa, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked down, and I saw it. A sliver of darkness, darker than the rest, was seeping through the cracks in the wood. It was reaching for my boots. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't even grab a coat. I burst out the front door into the sub-zero air, sprinting for the truck. But the truck wouldn't start. The engine groaned, a pathetic, dying sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence of Kalskeg Point. I looked toward the town square. The lights were on. Every single house, every street lamp, the diner, the post office, they were all blazing with a sickly yellowish glow. And there were people, or things that looked like people. I saw them through the windows. They were sitting at the tables. They were standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still, looking up at the moon. They weren't empty. They were filled with whatever that darkness was. I saw a woman in a floral dress, a dress that looked like it belonged in 1994, standing 10 feet from my truck. Her skin was the color of a frozen lake, and where her eyes should have been, there were just two hollow pits of shifting shadow. She didn't move toward me. She just stood there. Then she opened her mouth. It didn't stop opening until her jaw hit her chest. A sound came out, not a scream, but the sound of 1,000 radio stations playing static at once. I realized then why the village was empty. It's not that the people left, it's that the land claimed them. The permafrost isn't just frozen dirt up here. It's a tomb for something that was here long before the gold miners, something that gets hungry when the sun stays down too long. It takes your shape, it takes your memories. It keeps you in a loop, forever eating a burger in a diner that died 30 years ago. I managed to get the truck into neutral and let it roll down the incline, away from the town square. I didn't turn on the engine until I was 3 miles out, terrified that the vibration would draw them back. I'm currently in a motel in Fairbanks. My hands are still shaking so hard I can barely type this. I called the state troopers, told them there was an emergency in Calskag Point. They looked at me like I was insane. One of the older officers took me aside and said, "Son, there hasn't been a town at Calskag Point since the great earthquake of '64. The land swallowed it whole. There's nothing out there but ice. But I have the keys. I have the heavy brass ring in my pocket." And this morning when I woke up, I noticed a thin, black line of shadow seeping out from under my motel bed. It's not the permafrost shifting, it's following me. If you're looking at land grants in Alaska, if you see a deal that looks too good to be true, or a town that isn't on the map, keep driving. Because in the north, the silence isn't an absence of sound, it's an appetite. And once it knows your name, there isn't enough light in the world to keep the shadows away. Story 3. I used to think the smell of old bleach and rotting drywall was just the scent of history, until I realized it was the smell of something still breathing. I'm Marcus Miller, a 32-year-old freelance photographer based out of Gary, Indiana. If you know anything about Gary, you know it's a graveyard of the American dream miles of rusted steel mills and hollowed-out neighborhoods that look like they've been hit by a silent bomb. I've made a living capturing that decay, selling ruin porn to magazines and galleries that find beauty in the collapse. But there was one place I'd avoided for years, St. Jude's General. It sat on the edge of town like a jagged tooth, a massive 12-story concrete monolith that had been shuttered since the mid-90s. The locals don't talk about St. Jude's. They don't even look at it. There are stories, of course rumors, of a botched surgery ring or a psychiatric wing where the doctors were crazier than the patients. But I never put much stock in ghost stories. I'm a man of light and shadow optics and apertures, or at least I was. It was a Tuesday night around 11,000 p.m. when I finally decided to break the seal. I had a high-end client asking for a series on institutional silence, and St. Jude's was the gold standard. I packed my Canon Ri-5, a sturdy carbon fiber tripod, and 2 high-powered tactical flashlights. The air was thick with the kind of Midwestern humidity that makes your clothes stick to your skin, and as I hopped the rusted perimeter fence, the silence of the hospital felt heavy, like it was pressing against my eardrums. I found an entry point through a shattered laundry chute window on the ground floor. As soon as my boots hit the linoleum, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath hitched in the air, a white plume in the beam of my flashlight. The smell hit me next. It wasn't just dust. It was a copper-sweet tang, the unmistakable scent of old blood mixed with the chemical bite of formaldehyde. I started on the first floor, moving through the admitting lobby. It was a time capsule. Stacks of yellowing patient forms sat on the counters, held down by layers of grime. I set up my tripod, framing a shot of a collapsed wheelchair sitting in a shaft of moonlight. The silence was absolute until it wasn't. Clack, clack, clack. It was rhythmic, distant, coming from somewhere deep in the guts of the building. It sounded like a metal spoon hitting a radiator. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. In this line of work you expect squatters or copper thieves, but this sound was too deliberate, too steady. I turned off my light and waited. The darkness in St. Jude's isn't just an absence of light, it's a physical weight. It felt like it was trying to crawl into my lungs. After a minute, the sound stopped. I told myself it was just the building settling. Huge structures like this moan and groan as the temperature shifts. I moved toward the elevators, their doors pried open like screaming mouths, and decided to take the stairs. I wanted the top floor, the old EQ. That's where the best shots would be. As I climbed, the state of the building worsened. By the seventh, the floor was littered with rusted surgical instruments, as if someone had been interrupted mid-procedure and just dropped everything. I kept my head down, focusing on the beam of my light, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck. When I reached the 10th floor, the psychiatric and long-term care wing, the air changed. It felt busy, for lack of a better word. My skin was prickling with static electricity. I pushed through a set of heavy double doors, and that's when I saw it. In the center of the hallway, a single light bulb was flickering. It shouldn't have been possible. The power had been cut to this block for 30 years. But there it was, a sickly yellow pulse illuminating a hallway lined with padded cells. And standing directly under that light, about 50 feet away, was a gurney. It was pristine. No rust, no dust. The white sheets tucked in with military precision. "Hello?" I called out. My voice felt small, swallowed by the corridor. The clacking sound started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the gurney. A small, pale hand reached out from under the sheet and began tapping a metal reflex hammer against the side rail. Clack, clack, lack. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to bolt for the stairs. But I'm a photographer, uncursed with the need to see. I raised my camera, looking through the electronic viewfinder. I zoomed in, my hands shaking so hard the image stabilization was struggling to keep up. The sheet on the gurney began to rise, as if someone was sitting up. But there was no shape to it, no head, no torso, just the sheet lifting into the air held by invisible hands. I snapped a photo. The flash exploded, a blinding white strobe in the darkness. In that split second of light, I didn't see a ghost. I saw the room for what it actually was. The walls weren't covered in mold. They were covered in names. Thousands of names scratched into the plaster in tiny, frantic handwriting, and the gurney wasn't empty. For a fraction of a second, the flash revealed a man sitting there. He wore a surgeon's gown, but where his face should have been, there was only a jagged hole stuffed with yellowing gauze. The light went out. The silence returned, thicker than before. Then the whispering started. It wasn't one voice. It was hundreds. A low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from inside my own skull. Record us, witness us, help us leave. I dropped my tripod. I didn't care about the $3,000 worth of gear. I turned and sprinted for the stairwell. I could hear footsteps behind me, not just one pair, but dozens. The sound of bare feet slapping against wet linoleum, the squeal of ungreased gurney wheels, the frantic clicking of surgical scissors. I hit the stairs, jumping half flights at a time. My flashlight beam was dancing wildly. I reached the 5th floor when I felt a hand brush the back of my jacket. It was cold, so cold it felt like a burn. I didn't look back. I crashed through the laundry chute window, scraping my arms on the jagged glass, and didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I fumbled with my keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I threw the truck into gear and tore out of the parking lot, the tires screaming. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was 3 miles away, under the bright orange glow of a gas station. I sat there for a long time, my forehead resting on the steering wheel, waiting for my heart to slow down. I was safe. I was out. Then I remembered my camera. It was still hanging around my neck. I dropped the tripod, but the Rive was still there, tucked under my arm. My hands were trembling as I turned it on. I needed to know if I was crazy. I needed to know if the sensor had caught what I saw. I scrolled back to the last photo, the one with the flash. The image was sharp. The Rive's autofocus had locked on perfectly. In the center of the frame was the gurney. The sheet was floating, just as I'd seen. But the man with the gauze face wasn't there. Instead, the flash had captured something much worse. The hallway behind the gurney wasn't empty. It was packed. Dozens of people. Patients in tattered gowns, nurses in outdated caps, doctors with hollow eyes were all pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, filling every inch of the corridor. They weren't looking at the camera. They were all looking at me. And in the very front of the crowd, the man's forehead was resting on the steering wheel. It was me. The photo had been taken from the back seat of my truck. I haven't looked in my rearview mirror since that night. I sold my house in Gary and moved to Phoenix. I don't do photography anymore. I work in a warehouse now, under bright fluorescent lights that never turn off. People ask me why I gave up a successful career, why I won't even take a picture with my phone. I tell them I'm tired of looking. Because sometimes when the warehouse gets quiet, I hear it, a faint rhythmic sound coming from the back of the shipping containers. clack, 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 and I know that St. Jude's didn't just want me to witness them, it wanted me to bring them home.